Those present at the presentation began to discuss the report. One of the men began to say that they should urgently implement the technology that this research had provided and that this way they would outperform the competition. One of the women was worried that the investment might not pay off, so they couldn't throw money away. They began to argue. A nervous Ji Hoon realized that they were discussing internal company matters, and so he thought he should leave. Then the man involved in the argument banged his hand on the table and suggested asking for an expert's opinion. He pointed to Ji Hoon and asked what he thought about it. The guy was confused. Suddenly, the man scratched the back of his head and apologized because he remembered that Ji Hoon was not their employee. And he wasn't the only one who thought that. The man began to say that Ji Hoon's tense face reminded him of when he was a new employee and making a presentation in front of his boss for the first time. Ji Hoon smiled, thinking that it was really easy to mistake him for a kitten, a dog, or even a hutch employee. Perhaps he should have been happy that they liked him so much. One of the women turned to Yang's supervisor and smilingly asked him to escort Ji Hoon out, since they had detained him. The man agreed. Ji Hoon and Supervisor Yang left the office. The guy was walking on his ass and thought he was finally going to get out of here. Supervisor Yang laughed and said that Ji Hoon's knees were almost shaking, but he did a great job despite the presence of the director. They stood in the hallway. Yang said that he used to think Ji Hoon was shy, but today he changed his mind. The guy was surprised and thanked him. Suddenly, the boss said that they had already decided to merge the project. Ji Hoon was dumbfounded, very surprised by these words. He almost started to cry, because all the words that were said to him were just to comfort him, and he decided that everyone lives in a very unfair society. But Supervisor Yang began to calm him down, because everything had gone perfectly. Ji Hoon looked at him with tearful, surprised eyes. The bright sun was shining through the windows. Ji Hoon asked what to do about the project's leak. Yang replied that it was a matter of schools. That's why the boss was so angry and came to hear the presentation in person. He put his hands on the upset boy's shoulders. Yang couldn't talk about it, because sometimes it happens that the less you know, the better you sleep. He asked Ji Hoon to move away from the topic of business and asked him with a serious face if he was going to improve his skills abroad. Ji Hoon was surprised and replied that he hadn't planned to. Suddenly, Mr. Yang's face lit up and asked him what Ji Hoon thought about working for their company. The guy seemed happy, but was surprised and thought it was a recruitment. Yang smiled and asked him not to be scared, but to listen, because Ji Hoon probably knows that there is a lot of competition for the professionals they hire. Ji Hoon knew that. Yang continued to say with a smile that for some reason the boss liked Ji Hoon, so if he thought about a career, the doors of their company would be open to him. Ji Hoon smiled back and thanked him for his attention to his person. They were already at the entrance to the building, and Yang said that he should thank his boss, and that his presentation had impressed everyone. Then he thanked the guy and they said goodbye. Despite the bright sun, there were no more leaves on the trees. It was an incredible day. From the beginning, it seemed like everything was going to fail. Ji Hoon still couldn't believe that the director liked his performance. He thought it was some kind of magic. However, later, after a chain of luck, Ji Hoon smiled and thought, what kind of magic can there be these days? It's just that sometimes you get lucky. Suddenly, Ji Hoon's phone rang. He took it out and didn't realize what had happened. Suddenly he was confused and didn't know what to do. On screen 0 of the phone, a message appeared saying that Yona had sent him money. Ji Hoon remembered that it was the promised alimony. Then his surprise faded and he smiled. Ji Hoon wanted to get takeout chicken for dinner tonight, but now he could go to a restaurant. He walked down the street humming. He had even finished his workday early, so Ji Hoon tried not to waste any time. It was already evening when they arrived at the restaurant. His parents were a little upset. The father said that they were glad that their son came home from work early and took them to the restaurant, but he asked if everything was okay at work. The mother was worried that everything was expensive and that this evening would hurt her son's budget. Ji Hoon sat next to a happy Cherin. He said that he had left early because they had finished the project and he had money. There were various salads, steaks, pasta with shrimp on the table. The parents were surprised to see how Ji Hoon had come by the money. The boy explained that Cherin's mother had sent it to buy her food. Ji Hoon's father smiled and praised Cherin for cutting the steak very properly, according to etiquette, and asked who taught her how to do it. The girl smiled and said it was her mom. Ji Hoon's mother beamed with joy and said that Cherin was a precious little girl, very well-mannered, with good manners, and that Yona was a good mother. She wondered how Ji Hoon could have such a wonderful daughter, since he used to break all the dishes when he was a child. Cherin drank lemonade through a straw. Ji Hoon replied, embarrassed, that Cherin probably looked more like her mother. He looked at the smiling Cherin and thought that he was even a little sad that she didn't look like him, but that was nothing, and the main thing was that she was his daughter. The man exhaled and thanked his parents for taking care of Cherin all this time, and maybe they wouldn't have to do it anymore. The parents were surprised. They thought something had happened. The evening sun was shining on the restaurant's sign. Ji Hoon explained to his parents that Professor Chan was in trouble with the law, and now it was even worse, so he would not be coming back. There was no point in staying in the lab without the professor. My mom was surprised. She thought the professor needed some help. Her son began to reassure her he wasn't going to get a PhD anyway. He would just finish his master's degree and go into the field of engineering research. The parents were upset, but they believed that their son would succeed. Ji Hoon smiled and asked them not to worry about him. He had to be responsible, because now he had Cherin. It was already dark outside when the father and daughter returned home. Ji Hoon asked how she was doing at her grandparents' house. Cherin answered that it was good. Her grandmother cooked her something delicious every day. Ji Hoon looked at his daughter suspiciously and asked her if she liked him or her grandparents better. The girl smiled and said that she loved him the most. The man was very happy to hear this. He picked up his daughter and told her that her daddy also loved her more than anyone else in the world. Suddenly the girl reached for his face. Ji Hoon was surprised. She asked if he was comfortable wearing glasses all the time. The man smiled and said that of course he was uncomfortable. Then the girl asked why he wore them. The moonlight illuminated everything around them. Ji Hoon said that he could not read and look through the microscope without them. Cherin was surprised. Ji Hoon carried her in his arms and told her that he was very proud of her kind heart because she always took care of him. The little girl did not mind because he was her daddy. The usual cold winter was the same as before, but Ji Hoon felt so warm because he had Cherin by his side. The blue sky stretched over the courthouse. The criminal case against Professor Chan was fast-tracked because Yerim had spent a long time collecting evidence and presenting it. There was a huge crowd outside the building. Students were outraged when they learned about the incident. They were holding signs with inscriptions like Professor Chan, get out of education or rapist to jail. All the courses he taught were canceled. Chan Dongho was fired. Thanks to these events, Ji Hoon and Cherin had a relaxing week. The happy girl sat on the bed next to her father and asked if they would go to the amusement park tomorrow. Ji Hoon answered that they would. The weather was supposed to be nice tomorrow, so he suggested that Cherin have fun. They heard a noise outside the window. The father and daughter went to the window. Thin strips of water were running down the glass. Ji Hoon was surprised to see rain in the middle of winter. Cherin asked what they would do if it didn't stop raining by tomorrow. Ji Hoon almost shouted with anger. The weather forecast showed rain until at least Saturday. The man did not understand when it had been changed. In this weather, he couldn't even leave the house. Cherin folded her hands in front of her and told her worried father to pray as soon as possible. The girl closed her eyes and said that if she prayed, rain would go away. Ji Hoon was surprised. He thought that praying to the rain was very cute. He almost cried because he thought that if the prayers worked, he would have prayed himself to win the lottery 100 times. Cherin looked at him and was indignant because he had to pray. She folded his hands and told him to repeat after her. She diligently began to ask Rain not to come tomorrow. Ji Hoon thought it was strange, but he agreed. The two of them stood in front of the window with the rain pattering on it and repeated the same words. The man did not believe it would work. He didn't want Cherin to be upset in the morning. In the morning, Cherin began to wake up her father. Ji Hoon wiped his sleepy eyes, and his daughter asked him to go see something with her as soon as possible. The man was surprised, because the alarm clock hadn't rung yet. Cherin began to rush her father to go with her as soon as possible. Ji Hoon sat on the bed and did not understand what she wanted to show him. Outside the window, a bunch of small white snowflakes were flying. Cherin turned to her father and asked how he was feeling, because snow is better than rain. Ji Hoon couldn't believe his eyes, it really wasn't raining. They both looked at the falling snow. The girl said that all they had to do was pray. The man thought that his prayers had never been answered before, and this was a miracle. He looked at Cherin and didn't know what was better, the rain or the cold snow, but lately, one good thing after another. Cherin looked at the snow as if mesmerized. The man suggested that his daughter go wash and get ready and said that there would be traffic jams because of the snow. Cherin happily agreed. The happy girl said she had to hurry. Ji Hoon thought that today would be the best day he would ever have with Cherin. A huge Ferris wheel was sprinkling snow. Cherin was very happy, she thought it was a fairy tale world. Ji Hoon was worried that the girl would like it. She was happy to be in such a big, beautiful place. The man was thinking about where to go first, maybe to see some animals, but Cherin had already seen something. Ji Hoon noticed her interest and it was clear that they would go there. But just in case, the man asked if Cherin wanted to go there. The enchanted girl said yes. Ji Hoon couldn't stop looking, he felt like his heart was starting to pound. Cherin was wearing a deer cap with little bells on the ties. The girl said that this hat was very warm. Ji Hoon sat down in front of Cherin and said that it looked great on her. The happy girl asked her dad to pick something for her as well. The man was a little embarrassed and explained to Cherin that daddy doesn't wear cute things. The girl looked at him with very pitiful eyes and the man could not resist. A moment later, he was standing with horns and ears on his head and asked if it suited him. Cherin said he looked great. Suddenly, Ji Hoon heard a man and a woman talking about the father and daughter wearing deer antlers, and they thought it looked really cute. Ji Hoon thought it was nice to hear that after all the comments about how Ji Hoon was not like him. He looked at the girl and wondered when he would ever get to treat her like that again. Ji Hoon took a happy Cherin to the cash register and told her that today they would be reindeer. The fluffy snow continued to fall on the ground. Ji Hoon asked Cherin to tell him if she wanted to go somewhere. He began to tell her that Kids Village had rides for children and a zoo, they could see the animals and then have lunch at the cafe. Cherin pointed her finger in the direction of a certain attraction. It was a huge swing in the shape of an axe that swung to a great height. Cherin wanted to go there. The man was surprised. He explained to Cherin that it was an adult ride, and he promised to take his daughter there when she was older. The girl was surprised, but agreed. Then she asked to go on the roller coaster, but she was not allowed there either. Cherin was upset, because she wanted to go on a ride that went high, high into the sky. The man thought about it. He pointed to one of the rides and said that they could go there. After a while, it started snowing even more from the sky. A huge Ferris wheel stood out against the sky. Cherin looked through the glass of the booth in awe. Ji Hoon asked her if she liked it, and she said that she did, because they were very high up and could see the whole huge amusement park. Ji Hoon took out his phone and took a picture of his daughter. She asked what was in the distance. The girl looked very excited and sweet. Ji Hoon was touched. Cherin was so photogenic that any picture turned into a work of art. The girl was looking at everything around her. Ji Hoon didn't know when he would get to spend time with her like this again, so he decided to take more photos. After a while, Cherin happily looked at the rabbits sitting behind the fence. Then she and her dad ate sweets with joy. Later, they watched a magic show. They took pictures with a huge New Year's cat. They rode the carousel together. Cherin was looking at something with admiration. There was a huge, shiny, beautiful Christmas tree in front of them. While Cherin was looking at the tree, Ji Hoon took another photo of her. He looked at his phone. There were so many photos on it. He thought it was getting dark, so it was probably time to go home. He looked around, but Cherin was not there. Ji Hoon panicked and started calling for his daughter. He didn't understand where she had suddenly gone. Among the crowd, he finally saw Cherin. He thought that she was sad because her mother was not there. He approached Cherin, who was looking at something in surprise. The girl took her daddy's hand and said that he must be cold. She asked him to make her dad feel warm. Ji Hoon was surprised. Cherin pulled away from her father and asked him happily if he was warm. Ji Hoon sighed in surprise. Unbelievably, her words made his cold body and mood warm. Cherin looked at him and said that she had fun with him, and then asked him to come back here again. Ji Hoon was glad that she enjoyed it. He had no reason to be sad. He wanted Cherin to have fun, and everything went great. They stood by the Christmas tree, and Ji Hoon held out his little finger to Cherin and promised that they would come back here, but with her mom. Cherin gave him her little finger in return and happily agreed. It was still snowing outside. Ji Hoon and Cherin were lying in bed looking at pictures. The girl said that the sweets they ate were very tasty. The man promised to buy her more the next time they went there. Cherin commented on each photo. She said that she didn't even notice that the churros she was eating were sugar. They thought the huge bear on the scarf was very cute. So did the Christmas tree and the lights on it. Suddenly, Cherin shrieked and said that she liked one of the pictures the most. In the picture, Ji Hoon was holding Cherin in his arms and they were smiling. Cherin said she liked it because it was with her daddy. Ji Hoon was touched and asked if she really liked being photographed with him that much. The girl replied that she did, because it was always good to be with her dad. Then the man suggested that they take more photos together. The girl happily agreed. It was already dark outside, but the snow was still covering the ground. Ji Hoon was grateful for the day, because Cherin had fun. He hoped it would help her grow up happy. Surprisingly, the morning was very sunny. A bright-eyed Cherin woke up her dad because the sun was already up. Ji Hoon got up and asked her if she wanted to sleep some more, because she was tired at the amusement park yesterday. Cherin smiled and said she wasn't tired. Ji Hoon wondered why his daughter always woke up early. He had always thought that children usually slept a lot. The early morning sun shone through the window pane and flooded the whole room. Cherin asked him what he was thinking about. He told her that he was thinking about how beautiful his daughter was. Cherin hugged her father happily and asked if she was really beautiful. Ji Hoon replied that she was the most beautiful of all. Then the girl said that her dad was the best in the world. Ji Hoon reached for his glasses and said that he was going to make breakfast. The man started to get out of bed and suddenly winced in pain. He had hit his head. The man could not understand how he had managed to crack it. His eyes began to double. He thought his vision had deteriorated, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Cherin asked him if he was in pain. Ji Hoon replied that he was fine, he just bumped himself a little by accident. The man took off his glasses and decided to visit the ophthalmologist after breakfast. As Ji Hoon had planned, he went to an optical store. The doctor told him that his vision had improved. Ji Hoon stood in front of the ophthalmologist and did not understand how this was possible. The man in the white coat said that Ji Hoon's vision used to be -6, and now it was -4. It was like a miracle. There was a Snellen chart hanging in the office. The doctor thought that Ji Hoon had gone for laser vision correction. He denied it, because he hadn't done anything to his eyes at all. The doctor was embarrassed and adjusted his glasses. He advised Ji Hoon to go to an ophthalmology institute, because this fluctuation could be a symptom of a serious disease. Ji Hoon thought that all he needed was to ruin his eyesight. A woman in a white coat was sitting at a computer. She said that Ji Hoon had visited them before. She happily told Ji Hoon, who was sitting across from her, that his vision had improved to -3, which was a big difference. The man was surprised, because his ophthalmologist at the optical store had said he was -4. The woman was surprised and said that his myopia was adjusting so quickly on its own. Ji Hoon was worried. He thought it was bad. The doctor reassured him. This is, of course, a rare occurrence, but it is possible. There were a lot of glasses in the office behind the window. Ji Hoon asked if he needed new glasses then. The doctor replied that if his vision improved, he would have to change them more than once, but for now he needed to get new ones soon, and then they would look at the dynamics. Ji Hoon lay in bed and looked at his phone screen. He was looking for cases of improved vision, but there just never were any. Everyone had heard of sudden deterioration of vision, but never of sudden improvement. He thought that temporary improvements happened when you reduced the time spent in front of a monitor and using a smartphone, but this was definitely not the case for him. Ji Hoon put down his phone and decided to go for a walk because he was on vacation. You can't just lie around and do nothing all day. He was thinking of buying a new book for Cherin as well. He sat on the bed and asked Cherin, who was sitting at the table, if she wanted to go to the bookstore with him. Cherin happily put her hand up and said she did. She wants to read books. At the bookstore, Cherin's eyes were dazzled by the assortment. Ji Hoon told her to choose whatever she wanted and he would pay for it. He wondered what she might choose, maybe some fairy tales or comics. Suddenly, Cherin found what she wanted. She took a book from the shelf and said she wanted this one. Ji Hoon was a little surprised at her quick choice. But a moment later, Ji Hoon was overwhelmed when he saw which book Cherin wanted. The girl was happily holding a math book for preschoolers. The man asked her if she was sure about her choice. Cherin replied that it was an interesting book. Then he asked her, embarrassed, if she had ever studied math before. The happy girl replied that she hadn't, but she liked this book and wanted it. Ji Hoon took the book in his hands. He thought it was just money down the drain. She would probably read half a paragraph and then put it down forever. Then Ji Hoon held out his little finger to Cherin and asked her to promise him that she would read the book to the end. Cherin gave him her pinky back and agreed. Ji Hoon tried to choose another book for her as well. He thought that he would probably regret it, but he could buy one book, especially since he liked it so much. The father and daughter returned home. Ji Hoon hoped they had at least some food left in the fridge, because he wanted to get takeout, but he spent all his money on books. But Cherin was happy to be able to read her book. She flopped down on the bed and opened the book. Ji Hoon told her that while she was reading, he would make lunch. Ji Hoon opened the drawer and turned to the curious Cherin. He did not understand what could be interesting in this book. The man began to put food on the table. He thought that most kids hated math, and Cherin would probably give up on this book soon. Cherin approached Ji Hoon with the book in her hands. He invited her to the table because he had already prepared everything. Cherin opened the book in front of him and told him that she was done. Ji Hoon was petrified. He could not understand how she had solved all the problems. Cherin stood with the book open and smiled. She wanted her daddy to praise her. Ji Hoon couldn't imagine how she had managed to complete all the tasks. Her husband was sitting at the table with a book in his hands, confused and surprised. He did not believe that she had really solved everything. But Cherin asked him to believe. Ji Hoon looked at the correctly solved examples. These were exercises for preschoolers, and she had solved them all, but Cherin was not yet in the preparatory class. He was confused. He didn't make a single mistake. He thought that Yona had already taught Cherin how to add and subtract. Ji Hoon told Cherin that it was correct and asked if her mom had taught her. Cherin jumped for joy. She said she had learned it herself, from this book. Ji Hoon was surprised that Cherin could learn all this on her own and said that she was incredibly smart. The girl replied that she liked numbers and math because it was so much fun. Cherin danced and sang about being a math genius. Ji Hoon looked at her and thought that she really had a knack for it. Her husband was proud of her. This was another proof that she was his daughter, because he remembered being called a math genius as a child. He must have been. Ji Hoon suggested that Cherin have a lesson in the afternoon. He could teach her something new. The girl stopped dancing and was surprised. She started to be happy that her daddy would help her, thanked Ji Hoon, and said he was the best. After a while, they were solving the last example. Ji Hoon asked how much is 14 plus 6 minus 3. They were sitting at the dining room table. Cherin happily raised her hand and said it was 17. Her husband praised her and said that she had learned addition and subtraction very well. Ji Hoon picked up the phone and thought that he should also explain division and multiplication to her. He didn't know if she would be able to memorize the multiplication table, but it was worth a try. He happily told Cherin that they were going to learn the multiplication table and asked her to repeat after him. The girl gladly agreed. There were various papers with examples and tables on the table. Ji Hoon taught Cherin the multiplication table by 2, and she repeated it clearly. After a while, they finished the table by 9, and Ji Hoon asked if Cherin had memorized anything. The girl, who had been listening attentively, said that she had memorized everything. Then Ji Hoon began to say that she would not be able to remember the first time and should repeat it again. Cherin interrupted him and confidently said that she had memorized everything. Ji Hoon was surprised. He could not believe that his daughter was so smart. Cherin stood up angrily and asked him what he had just said. Ji Hoon shouted. He hadn't realized he had said it out loud. Cherin was angry that her daddy didn't believe she was that smart. Ji Hoon started to deny it and say that he was just very surprised. She looked at him angrily and asked him if he didn't believe she was smart because she was Kim Cherin, Daddy's daughter, Kim Cherin. Ji Hoon was embarrassed and said that of course he believed in her abilities. Cherin angrily began to stretch the smile on Ji Hoon's surprised face with her fingers and told him that he should be happy and smile if he believed in her. The confused man began to say that he did believe in her and would smile. Satisfied, Cherin snorted, put her hands to her sides, and said that she had memorized the entire table. Ji Hoon smiled and offered to practice. Ji Hoon asked how many 4 by 6. Cherin confidently replied that it was 24. Then he asked her how many 7s would be. The girl smiled and answered 49. Several more examples were asked and Cherin gave the correct answer to all of them. Cherin said she had memorized everything. But Ji Hoon couldn't believe it, and he asked if she was sure her mom hadn't taught her. Cherin got angry again. She didn't understand why her dad didn't believe her. She was upset because she wasn't a liar, and Ji Hoon himself had said he believed in her. The man apologized and explained that he was just surprised because his daughter was amazing. Cherin wrapped herself in a blanket and turned away from Ji Hoon, who didn't know what to do. She said that she wouldn't believe him either, because her father's daughter was a liar. So she decided to curl up in the blanket and start to get offended. Excited, Ji Hoon began to say that this was not true and she was not a liar. He apologized to Cherin, asking her to forgive him, and said that he would always believe her. Cherin snorted under the covers. She turned angrily to him and told him never to doubt her. Ji Hoon folded his hands in front of him and promised that he would not doubt her and asked if she had forgiven him. The girl stood up and hugged Ji Hoon, and she couldn't help but forgive him because he was her dad. He thanked the girl very much and said that he had the best daughter in the world. As they hugged, Ji Hoon thought about how children her age learn multiplication. He couldn't understand it. Or maybe his daughter was just a genius. The sun lit up the houses and small balconies cast a long shadow. It was in this way that Ji Hoon realized, like many other parents, that his child was a genius. He decided to study math with her until Cherin started preschool. They started with something fun. There was a pile of math books on the table. Cherin calculated that 4 by 4 by 3.14 would be 50.24 square centimeters. She smiled and asked if she was right. She considered herself a math genius. Ji Hoon held the preschool textbook in his hands and could not believe it. Cherin could calculate the plane of a circle. She was only 6 years old, but she had learned the entire preschool math curriculum in just 1 month. Ji Hoon looked at the book, and there were various geometric shapes and examples on the pages. Cherin was solving not only ordinary but also the most difficult problems. The girl grasped everything on the go and had a very deep understanding of the theory. In her dreamy father's imagination, Cherin stood with a huge cup in her hands. He believed that with such skills she could win a philosophy prize. She would be the youngest person to receive this title. Ji Hoon looked at the little smiling Cherin and could not understand how she had such genetic aptitude for the exact sciences. The man thought about it. He had a very ordinary level of intelligence, and as far as he remembered, so did Yona. He had once read that genius children are born regardless of heredity. It seemed to be true. When Ji Hoon found out that Cherin was a prodigy, he had another problem. The man looked at the screen in search of a school for gifted children. He didn't know what kind of education would be best for her. Ji Hoon sat at his desk and looked at his daughter. He had been desperate since he found out how smart she was. He thought that if Yona was with them, they could think about it together. Ji Hoon looked at his phone, which was off. Yona had sent the money and that was it. He still couldn't reach her. He didn't know what to do if the woman just didn't pick up the phone. Ji Hoon leaned back in his chair. He thought about the choice he had to make that would affect Cherin's future. It was very difficult to make a decision on his own. Cherin was lying on the bed with a pencil in her hand, doing math problems. Ji Hoon thought that the new year was coming soon, so they would go to his parents' house and he would consult them. The New Year's Eve holiday had begun. The sun was blinding everything around. Ji Hoon's parents were happy to see Cherin. She missed them very much. Ji Hoon's father told them they were good for coming and asked if they had been stuck in traffic. Ji Hoon answered embarrassedly that it was not that far to Suwon, there were no traffic jams, and he hoped that there would not be any now. His father came to the car door and told everyone to get in, because it was a long way to go. Ji Hoon's mother and Cherin sat in the back. The woman was pleasantly surprised that her Cherin knew how to fasten her seatbelt herself. She praised the girl for it. Cherin replied that it was her mom who taught her to buckle up when riding in the car. Suddenly, Cherin looked at her grandmother and said that her daddy was studying math with her. The woman was surprised, because it was too early for such a science. Ji Hoon turned to his mother and said that Cherin was a smart girl because she had learned the whole preschool program in 3 weeks. The father was surprised. He did not believe that this was possible. Cherin was offended again and snorted because her grandfather did not believe her either. They were driving fast on the road. Ji Hoon said in embarrassment that he would not lie to his parents. His father thought about it and said that it meant their granddaughter was really that smart. Ji Hoon said that this was worrying. The father didn't understand it. He thought it was better to have a child who was smart than to have a child who was stupid. The man began to say, embarrassed, that he had to give Cherin a proper education that would develop her talents, and he asked if his parents had any ideas. His father wasn't sure, because he had never had to raise a genius. Ji Hoon could not deny it. His mother was a little worried, and she thought that there was no need to rush, because he needed to give himself time to think about such a difficult decision. Ji Hoon embarrassedly agreed. Huge buildings loomed over their car. Ji Hoon thought that this was a problem, because he had no one to discuss the matter with. If only he could get hold of Yona. Different voices were heard in the house they arrived at. Everyone had finally seen Ji Hoon's daughter, about whom he had talked so much. Several people stood by Cherin and admired her beauty. The girl smiled and introduced herself, saying her name was Kim Cherin. The woman turned to Ji Hoon and asked him with a smile if he was sure that Ji Hoon was his daughter, because it was not his set of genes. The woman was Ji Hoon's cousin. The man was embarrassed to ask if he spoke to his cousin about his children in this way and said that she was indeed his daughter. Suddenly they looked around because a boy was talking to Ji Hoon. He was surprised that Ji Hoon still hadn't gotten through to Cherin's mother and said that he was like a hillbilly and maybe it would be better to contact a private detective. The guy's name was Ji Hoon. Ji Hoon looked at the guy menacingly and asked what he meant. Ji Hoon asked him equally menacingly if it had ever occurred to Ji Hoon that something might have happened to the girl's mother. It was getting dark outside. Ji Hoon said he would think about it. Ji Hoon was outraged, because when a person disappears, the passage of time speeds up dramatically. Ji Hoon turned away from him. He didn't know what to do. He thought about calling him a hillbilly and wondered if he looked stupid. Ji Hoon went outside. It was already dark. He thought that on the other hand, Ji Hoon was right and he should ask Cherin about her mom. Suddenly, the little girl looked outside and asked in surprise what her daddy was doing here. The man shouted and asked why she had come out. It was cold. She ran up to him and hugged him, and the girl came out to warm her dad, because Cherin never gets cold. Ji Hoon was touched that Cherin was taking care of him. His daughter was such a good girl. He wondered if he was the reason she couldn't express her kindness. He pulled Cherin away from him and asked if she missed her mom. The girl deflated. She thought about it for a while, smiled, and replied that she did miss her mom. Ji Hoon thought about it. She had been keeping it all to herself all this time, and he decided to discuss it with her when they got back. Suddenly, his phone rang in his pocket. Ji Hoon wondered who was calling on his day off. The man looked at the screen and froze. It was Bae Young calling him. Ji Hoon put the phone to his ear. A little scared, he asked if it was really Yona calling him. The woman replied that it was her. Who else could be calling him from this number? Ji Hoon began to yell at her because she kept not answering the phone. Cherin stood behind him, scared. She turned to her father. Ji Hoon just looked at her and continued talking to Yona. He was angry. He asked her where she was and why she didn't answer her phone. She replied that she was very far away. There was thick, flaky snow falling where the woman was. She could not say where she was. Ji Hoon began to suspect that she had debts and was now in hiding. The woman denied it, because she had sent him alimony and a large amount of money. Then Ji Hoon asked her if she missed Cherin. Yona remained silent. But after a few seconds, she answered that of course she did. She also told the worried Ji Hoon that she missed him because she loved them both very much. After these words, Ji Hoon got the answer to the question that had been tormenting him since Cherin appeared. He began to remember all the good moments with her and realized that he had accepted Cherin as his daughter because he still had feelings for Yona despite the fact that they hadn't seen each other for many years. He was angry with the woman for suddenly disappearing when everything was going well, and now she says she loves him after 7 years of absence. Concerned, Ji Hoon said he had an important question for Yona. He looked at the surprised Cherin. He didn't want to ask, but otherwise he wouldn't understand. Ji Hoon asked if Yona had left Cherin for another man. The woman began to say angrily that Ji Hoon was not in his right mind. The woman could see a big blue sea in front of her, and her hair was covered with snow. She said that there was only him and Cherin in her life and she would never leave them. She began to say that if he ever said something like that again, even jokingly, she would do bad things to him. Ji Hoon was embarrassed and apologized. Yona turned to her worried husband again, her hair blowing in the winter wind. She said that she loved him and her daughter and asked him to trust her and just wait a little longer. Again, Yona spoke to the distraught husband. The winter wind blew her hair as she expressed her love for him and their daughter. She asked him to believe her and to just wait a little longer. Ji Hoon then asked the woman to answer another question. He asked when she would be able to explain everything to him. Yona wasn't sure, but she promised to tell him everything in time. She asked Ji Hoon to trust her and wait for her. Ji Hoon sighed and asked Yona to promise. She did so. Ji Hoon remembered what he had said about Cherin being very smart. She was happy to hear that. The man said he didn't think it was just because she was their daughter. He thought Cherin was a prodigy. Ji Hoon asked Yona what she thought about sending her to a school for gifted children. The woman replied that he could send her there if she wanted to, and asked Ji Hoon to remember that nothing would work if it wasn't Cherin's own desire. Yona said that Ji Hoon may not know Cherin well, but she is actually a very stubborn girl. Cherin looked at her father with interest. She did not know what it meant to be stubborn. Ji Hoon didn't know which of them was telling the truth. He told Yona that he would do everything he could for her anyway, but he couldn't be home all the time. He would find a job soon. Ji Hoon told Yona that he needed her here. The woman replied that she would send money so that Ji Hoon could hire a nurse for Cherin. The man did not understand her words. She repeated that Ji Hoon should hire a tutor for her because she needed to study. The man started to get angry, and Yona asked him how much money he needed for that. Ji Hoon was angry, telling the woman that they were talking about Cherin's future and that temporary solutions were not appropriate. Yona replied that she couldn't come anyway, because she had already told him. The man didn't let her finish. He knew she was in some kind of accursed situation. Cherin was scared. Ji Hoon continued to say that he would raise the child alone, and Yona would have to explain everything to her daughter later. The woman wanted to say that she didn't mean it, but Ji Hoon hung up the phone. The man was desperate. He didn't want to hang up and thought he should call her back. Suddenly, Cherin asked about the fight. Ji Hoon turned to her. He embarrassedly walked over to the girl and asked if she thought it was because she was scared that her dad was yelling, and then apologized. Cherin asked him not to fight with her mom. Desperate, Ji Hoon realized that he had shown Cherin his bad side and realized that he could not make such scenes in front of her anymore. The man said that the girl was probably cold and took her inside, promising that her daddy would be back soon. Ji Hoon picked up the phone again and dialed Yona. He wanted to apologize to her. He was told that the caller could not accept his call. He was surprised. He did not believe that she could block him so suddenly and decided to dial again. He smiled as he waited to hear from her, but the caller again said that the caller could not take his call. These words ran through his head. Ji Hoon was almost crying when he realized that she had blocked him. The phone repeated the same phrase again. He scolded himself, because how could he end the only call he had ever had like that? If only he had known that he would not be able to reach her again, he would have told her that he loved her too. Suddenly his eyes rounded with surprise and he looked at the phone screen. Yona had texted him. She apologized for giving the impression that she was taking this situation very lightly, but in fact she had thought it through. She added that she would like to call them more often and talk to Cherin, but that it was a bit difficult for her. She asked Ji Hoon to write to her and she would reply any time. Ji Hoon wrote to ask if she was telling the truth. Yona replied that of course it was true. She would send money for Cherin, and if Ji Hoon could not find a tutor for her, she could at least buy her some books. The man thought about it. She really wanted to hire a tutor, but it was a lot of money every month. He did not understand where Yona would get that kind of money. As far as he remembered, the woman did not have a rich, ordinary family. He began to suspect that Yona had started doing something illegal. He decided to ask her about it and wrote her a message. Yona did not understand what he was talking about. She reminded him that she was from a rich family and that her family gave her the money, so he didn't have to worry. Ji Hoon thought that her family was giving her as much as his monthly salary, which was a lot of money. Ji Hoon thought this was suspicious. He decided to ask Cherin tomorrow where she lived, because children would not lie. In the morning, the sun was peeking through the white clouds that covered the sky. The sun's rays made their way to the roofs of the buildings. Cherin happily told me that her mom's house was very, very big. She said that when she was little, she would sometimes get lost in it, but her uncle would always find her. Ji Hoon held the box in his hands and marveled at her story. He imagined a huge castle and a man with a monocle. It sounded incredible. Even if you win the lottery, it's impossible to live in such luxury. Ji Hoon wondered who Yona's parents were. Ji Hoon's mother came over to them and asked if something had happened to Yona, because she had heard that they had talked about her with her parents yesterday. Ji Hoon smiled and replied that his mother shouldn't worry, that Yona had called him and said that she was fine. Then my mom asked if he would tell her anything, and Ji Hoon smiled and said no, because she had important family matters. The man couldn't get the thought out of his head that if Yona's family was so rich that they lived in a castle, then it was possible that they were in a war over their inheritance. It was the only logical thought. Cherin told her daddy that she had seen many stars in the sky at night and that she had had a very tasty dinner yesterday. She liked it. She asked her dad to come here more often. Ji Hoon patted Cherin on the head and said that they would definitely come back. He looked at Cherin's joy and decided to teach her on his own for the time being. Everyone was returning home by car. Ji Hoon had no hurry. He had a long vacation and the opportunity to be with Cherin. A week has passed since the new year. Ji Hoon began to see poorly with his glasses on, so he went to the ophthalmologist again. And what he heard. The female doctor was embarrassed. She adjusted the glasses and said that now Ji Hoon had +1 vision in both eyes. The man was dumbfounded. He did not understand how this could happen. The woman took him by the hands and asked him to study his case and write a dissertation. She could not miss this opportunity. Ji Hoon agreed, of course, but he didn't understand whether he needed to wear glasses or not. The doctor looked at him in surprise. She said it was obvious. Ji Hoon no longer needed glasses or their services. The man did not know what to say. He did not understand how this was possible. He was overwhelmed with joy and was shaking in his chair. After 15 years of wearing glasses all the time, this was real happiness. The weather outside was clear as usual. Ji Hoon walked along the sidewalk. He wondered how this was possible. Then he stopped. Ji Hoon thought that he had never seen so clearly without his glasses. He looked at his reflection in the window. He thought that his friends would be very surprised and most likely think that he had had laser correction. Now he could see. He looked pretty good without his glasses. Ji Hoon admired himself to the strange looks of passers-by. Suddenly, the man was frightened. He suddenly received a phone call from Jiangsu. He asked why Ji Hoon had been so hard to reach lately, and he was worried that Ji Hoon had hit the fan. Ji Hoon asked why Jiangsu, after they hadn't talked for a month, had asked if he was alive. The man asked his friend not to worry, and if he decided to die, he would ask the former to bury Jiangsu in his will. The guy couldn't understand where Ji Hoon was all this time, and he was beginning to think that he was having family problems. The man could not say that everything was fine. He decided to teach Cherin at home. Jiangsu thought about it. He asked if Ji Hoon was planning to get married. The man was stunned by this question. Ji Hoon joked and said that he was going to marry twice. Then his friend asked why he didn't come to the university. The man had other reasons. Suddenly he thought why he was hiding Cherin from his friends. After all, she was his legitimate daughter. He quickly told Jiangsu that if he was so interested in knowing, he should come to his house and say goodbye. Then Ji Hoon thought that even though he invited him, Jiangsu can make a circus out of anything and maybe he shouldn't have invited him. Ji Hoon opened the door and told Cherin that he was back. The girl was happy to see him. She noticed that her dad didn't have his glasses and said that it looked good on him without them. Ji Hoon blushed. Cherin smiled and said that his glasses were very thick. Ji Hoon was embarrassed. He thought his glasses were stylish. Children are very direct sometimes. Cherin put her fingers up and said that he was very handsome now. She hugged her dad and asked him not to wear glasses anymore. Ji Hoon smiled and said that Daddy would go without them now. Then he asked what his daughter had been doing all day. Cherin answered that she was doing math and then saw an interesting thing on the computer called MeTube. She happily said that she was watching beautiful oppa dancing. Ji Hoon realized that it was probably Baze, a popular K-pop group. Cherin put her hand to her heart and confidently said that she would make her dad be as cool as them. Ji Hoon scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. He said it would be difficult, but he thanked her for her efforts. Cherin got angry thinking that Daddy didn't believe her again and said she would make him cool anyway. Ji Hoon raised his hands and thanked her and said he believed her. He thought that it would be good to be cool for his daughter. Then he thought that he should pay attention to his appearance. It was getting dark outside. Pink clouds hung over the houses. Ji Hoon asked what Cherin would like for dinner. She said that she wanted her daddy to cook something. It was always delicious. The man looked at her and asked her to wait a little while Daddy cooked something. He opened the refrigerator and wondered what side dish to choose. Suddenly, Cherin said that someone was at the door. Ji Hoon didn't know who it could be. Jang-soo was standing on the doorstep with two guys. They were holding bags of drinks. Ji Hoon did not expect him to come on the same day. Cherin asked curiously who these men were. Ji Hoon embarrassedly replied that they were friends of her father's and asked if she would mind if they had dinner with them. Cherin thought that they were poor if they came to eat with him, and her mother had taught her that you should help the poor. Ji Hoon thought that the students were really poor people and mentally apologized to the boys. Ji Hoon opened the door. Chang-soo was complaining that he almost died of cold. Suddenly he was numb with cold. The beautiful Cherin stood in front of him, surprised. Chang-soo could not move. The boys began to ask him why he was not coming in and how much longer they would be cold. Chang-soo suddenly shouted that he saw an elf. The boys were surprised and thought that Chang-soo's brain was frozen. They told him to go inside and shut up. But suddenly the boys were also frozen. They also saw the beautiful Cherin. They didn't know what to say. Then Chang-soo asked Ji Hoon in horror who the little elf was. The man put his arms around the smiling Cherin and said that she was his daughter. Chang-soo looked at Ji Hoon closely and asked him to tell him who it was without joking. Ji Hoon was embarrassed to say that it was indeed his daughter and asked him to take his word for it. The girl took her father's hand with her two small hands. She smiled and politely said that her name was Kim Cherin and she was indeed her daddy's daughter. The men could not believe it. Chang-soo thought she was a foster child. Ji Hoon was outraged and asked him to watch his language in front of the child. He explained that she was his biological child and asked why he had come and what was in the packages. Chang-soo embarrassedly replied that Ji Hoon had invited him, so he came. He was worried about him being here and thought they could have a drink. Ji Hoon said that they would not drink in front of the child. Jang-soo scratched the back of his head in embarrassment and said that he didn't know about it. He said that 2 months ago Ji Hoon lived alone and asked how he managed to have a child in 2 months. The man replied that there was no point in talking to them and decided to show them the document. He handed the men a paternity test and told them to read it. They were surprised, it was really true. Then Jang-soo started asking if Ji Hoon understood why it was hard for them to believe it. No one in their position would have believed it when they heard that a man had suddenly had a child. Cherin was standing next to them. She said she wouldn't have believed it either. Ji Hoon asked her in embarrassment why she was standing next to them. Then Ji Hoon said that it was his fault for not explaining everything to them from the beginning. He invited the men to come in and said he would explain everything over dinner. The men were sitting in Ji Hoon's apartment. They were surprised that he hadn't seen Cherin's mother for 7 years. Jang-soo said that the girl was very beautiful and that her mother was probably beautiful too. Then he asked if they had any photos. Ji Hoon replied that there were no photos, but that Cherin's mom was really beautiful. Jang-soo thought about it. He said that Ji Hoon was lucky that Cherin didn't look like him. He had heard that the first girl looked like her father, and if she had inherited his looks. Ji Hoon heroically slapped Chang-soo and said that he had been asking for it for a long time. The men sat at the table in astonishment, and Cherin smiled. Jang-soo asked why Ji Hoon was doing this to him, because he knew it was a joke. The guy started to say that Ji Hoon has been looking better lately, and with the way he looks now, people would more easily believe that Ji Hoon is his daughter. They also noticed that he didn't have glasses and asked about laser correction. Ji Hoon blushed. He replied that his eyesight had improved recently, so he didn't need glasses anymore. It was the first time he had heard that since he started raising Cherin. He was flattered. Cherin smiled and said that her daddy was the most handsome man in the world. The men also smiled at her and said she was very nice. If they had a daughter like her, they would blow dust off her. Ji Hoon decided to show off. Just a month ago, Cherin had just learned to count, and now she was solving quadratic equations. The boys were surprised. They did not understand how this was possible. Ji Hoon was outraged that no one believed him, and Cherin confidently said that she could really do it. Then one of the boys embarrassedly wrote an example and asked Cherin to solve it. Cherin asked him to wait a bit and concentrated. She happily handed the paper back to the men and asked them if it was correct. The men were surprised. One of them said that when he was Cherin's age, he only liked to poop. Jangsu jokingly asked if he didn't like to pee. Cherin jumped up and down and said she was smart and beautiful. Chansu jokingly started pushing Ji Hoon and said that Cherin was very smart and if he raised her properly, he would have a happy old age. While Jangsu was joking, Ji Hoon thought that he really needed to raise her properly, but she was too smart for him to do it alone. He looked at Cherin, who was solving problems and surprising the boys with her abilities. The man thought that while he would finish his PhD, Cherin would study the entire high school course. One day he would have nothing to tell her. And then it would probably be time to send her to a school for gifted children. Suddenly, Jangsu whispered to Ji Hoon to listen to him. He said that the university held an Olympiad for gifted children every April and asked if he could enroll Cherin. Ji Hoon was outraged. Why would a 7-year-old go to a university Olympiad? Jangsu confidently said he had connections and asked Ji Hoon to trust him. Ji Hoon didn't really expect any of this, but he told his friend to do what he could. The weather was clear in the morning. White clouds floated in the sky. Ji Hoon's phone rang. It was Woo Chang-soo. He was wearing a towel around his neck. He answered the phone and the man on the phone asked him to meet him on Friday. Ji Hoon asked why. The man said he had an appointment with a professor who would be on the jury. Cherin needed to test before the Olympics. Ji Hoon wondered if his friend had done this for him. Jangsu replied that he could move a little for Ji Hoon's sake, so that he could owe him a favor. The professor wanted to see Cherin's abilities in person. Ji Hoon agreed, as he had no plans on Friday anyway. Jangsu said he would pass on his agreement. Ji Hoon was a little worried. Cherin was a genius, of course, but he was a little worried that she was in for a real test. What if he had overestimated her abilities? Ji Hoon was sweating with worry. But he changed his mind, because solving quadratic equations at the age of 7 is brilliant. Suddenly, he saw himself standing in front of a professor who said that quadratic equations are nothing for a genius at that age, that geniuses are capable of doing mathematical analysis. He thought that perhaps his measure of genius was too low. Cherin asked her dreamy father what he was thinking about. She smiled and looked at him. Ji Hoon decided that he shouldn't worry so much. No matter what happened, Cherin would always be his daughter. He thought that he shouldn't look insecure and worry in front of her. Ji Hoon hugged Cherin and told her that he loved her even if she was not a genius. The girl replied that she loved him too. It was Friday afternoon. A building stood tall in the sky. A woman looked at Cherin and said that she was pleased to meet her. She introduced herself as Professor Baek Na-hai, but the girl could just call her Professor Baek. A happy Cherin agreed and said it was nice to meet her as well. The woman turned to Ji Hoon and said that his daughter was a smart girl and she had prepared test questions for her. Ji Hoon thanked her and said he wouldn't interrupt. Cherin sat down on a chair. The professor asked her to solve everything she could and she had an hour. Ji Hoon was worried. Cherin had never tried to solve problems for an hour before, and he did not know if she would be able to concentrate for long. After a while, Cherin brought the papers she was writing on to the professor and said that she had already solved everything. The woman said that Cherin was a very diligent girl and had solved all the problems, but she needed to check their correctness. She asked Ji Hoon to wait a little longer. The man hoped for the best. The scale of expectation began to rise. He began to calm himself down, because if he hoped for the best, it would be painful to be disappointed. His expectation level began to decrease. Cherin happily told her dad that she hoped for a good outcome. He smiled and said that he still loved her no matter what the outcome. Cherin said she loved her daddy too and made a heart with her hands above her head. Suddenly, the professor came out and said she had checked the test. The scale of expectation went up to the maximum and Ji Hoon didn't know what to do. He wondered what Cherin's score was. The sun was shining through the windows. The professor said that Cherin had taken the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Test. This is the most reliable modern test that shows the level of intelligence. The excited woman said that the margin of error is usually plus or minus 16 points. Cherin's score was 150. This score means that Cherin is a true genius, of which there are only 0.04%. Ji Hoon was shocked. His daughter is a real genius. The professor noted that the girl also showed a high score in terms of socialization. She will have great success in the future. Cherin was beaming with joy. A happy Ji Hoon thanked the professor. She asked if he had ever thought about sending the girl to a school for gifted children. The surprised man said that he had, but that usually children older than Cherin study there. The professor said that some of these schools have elementary grades, usually starting in the 6th grade. She thought Cherin had a chance of getting in. Ji Hoon turned to his daughter and asked if she wanted to go to such a school. The girl replied that if she could go there with her dad, she would.